Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. You know how some businesses just seem to have this really clear path, they stick to their strategies, while others, they seem to change direction all the time.
Yeah, it's quite noticeable sometimes.
Well, today we're diving into some fascinating research that looks at why this might be especially true for family businesses. And actually, this paper is part of the readings for the upcoming virtual summer school in entrepreneurship research.
Oh, that's right, for 2025. It's a great program.
It really is. This will be its 5th year. Can you believe it? Started back in 2021.
Wow, time flies. And it's still no fee, which is amazing. We should definitely give a shout out to the organizers.
Absolutely. Big thanks to Professor Vishal K. Gupta and PhD candidate Athena Skiadopoulou at the University of Alabama. They've really spearheaded this unique initiative.
For sure. A fantastic resource for researchers.
So for everyone listening, have you ever wondered why some companies seem so, committed to their plans? We're going to explore that today, looking specifically at family-owned firms.
And we're going to unpack the key ideas from a 2021 paper in Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice. It's called Strategic Persistence in Family Business by Fang, Chrisman, and Holt.
Okay, so our mission today is pretty clear. Pull out the core insights from this research on strategic persistence, understand what it means for family firms, and, why they behave the way they do over time.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Let's start with the basics. What exactly do they mean by strategic persistence? It sounds a bit academic.
It does, but the idea is quite simple, really. It's about how consistently a company allocates its resources, things like money, effort, attention, to key strategic areas over time.
So it's not just about staying the same, not changing products?
Not necessarily. It's more about the pattern of investment. Are they consistently putting, say, 5% of sales into R&D year after year? Or is it jumping around? It's about that internal consistency, not just about keeping up with competitors or staying static.
Okay, so it's about a company's own rhythm, its own pattern of doing things, regardless of what others are doing.
Exactly. And the paper points out this persistence can be, a bit of a double-edged sword.
A double-edged sword? How so? What are the upsides?
Well, on the positive side, consistency can lead to real benefits. Things like building deep expertise, achieving economies of scale, maybe reducing uncertainty.
Makes sense. If you keep doing something, you get good at it. Maybe cheaper too.
Right. And it can create a sense of stability, build a strong reputation. Customers and investors often like predictability. It can reinforce a market position.
Okay, I see the benefits. But what's the downside, the other edge of the sword?
The danger is that too much persistence can slide into, rigidity. You might miss new opportunities because you're too focused on the old path.
Like sticking to your guns even when the market's clearly shifted.
Precisely. It can lead to organizational inertia, stifle creativity, make it hard to adapt when you really need to. You might keep investing in something that just isn't working anymore.
So it's that classic tension, isn't it? Stability versus adaptability.
Absolutely. And this brings us to the really interesting part of the paper, its main argument.
Which is?
They argue that family firms tend to show more strategic persistence than non-family firms.
Okay, that's the core claim. Why? What's the thinking behind that? Why would family businesses be more likely to stick to their strategies?
The researchers use behavioral theory to explain it. They focus on two main things. The unique goals that often drive family businesses and their specific governance structures.
Right. Family goals and family governance. Let's break that down. What kind of goals are we talking about?
They highlight two big ones: maintaining family tradition and something they call parsimony.
Family tradition. That sounds like it's about more than just profit.
Oh, absolutely. It's often deeply emotional. It's about the family's connection to the business, its history, the legacy, the family identity wrapped up in it.
So things like keeping the business in the family for the next generation.
Exactly. Maintaining control across generations is often a huge priority. So from that perspective, sticking with established strategies can feel like honoring the past, preserving that legacy.
And making a big strategic change might feel like breaking with tradition or disrespecting what came before.
It could be seen that way, yeah, like jeopardizing the continuity of the family's involvement. It connects to this idea some people talk about, innovating through tradition.
Innovating through tradition, how does that work?
The idea is that a deep respect for the firm's history and values doesn't just hold it back, it can actually guide and inspire innovation in a way that's consistent with the long-term identity. So persistence isn't necessarily anti-innovation.
Interesting. So tradition can be a guide rail, not just an anchor. Okay, what about the second goal? Parsimony. That's not a word you hear every day.
No. In this context, parsimony basically means being really careful with resources, frugal even, trying to conserve funds and avoid unnecessary costs, especially the costs that come with big changes.
Because it's often the family's own money on the line, right? Their personal wealth is tied up in the business.
Exactly that. They're often spending their own capital, so they tend to be more cost-conscious, perhaps more risk-averse when it comes to major strategic shifts that require big investments, new hiring, maybe taking on debt.
So a big, expensive strategic pivot might seem less attractive if your main goal is to protect the family's wealth and keep costs down.
Precisely. Change is often costly and uncertain. Parsimony pushes against that. It might also mean avoiding bringing in too many outsiders, which can complicate things.
Okay, let me see if I've got this. The desire for tradition makes sticking to the plan feel important, kind of emotionally resonant. And the desire for parsimony makes changing the plan seem costly and risky.
That's a great summary. The behavioral theory suggests these family-centric goals increase the perceived value of sticking with past strategies and decrease the attractiveness of making significant changes.
And how does family governance fit into this? How does the way the family controls the business reinforce this?
Well, governance is about how the family exerts control through ownership, board seats, management positions.
Right, how they actually steer the ship.
Exactly. Because the family often has significant control, they can actually implement strategies that align with their goals of tradition and parsimony. They have the power to prioritize these long-term family-focused objectives.
So they can resist pressures for short-term changes that might come from, say, outside investors in a non-family firm.
That's the idea. Their governance structure gives them the autonomy to pursue stability and continuity, even if it means sacrificing some short-term opportunities.
And this combination of goals and governance leads directly to their first big finding, their first hypothesis.
Yes. Hypothesis 1. Family firms exhibit greater strategic persistence than non-family firms.
And they tested this.
They did. They used a big data set, 798 manufacturing firms from the S&P 1500 index, looking at data from 1996 all the way to 2013. That's over 8,700 firm-year observations.
Wow, that's a lot of data points over a long time.
It is. And their statistical analysis, using canal regression, found strong support for this hypothesis. Family firms, on average, showed more consistency in their strategic resource allocations.
Okay, so the overall picture is family firms tend to stick to their strategic knitting more. But I imagine not all family firms are the same, right?
Absolutely not. The researchers knew that too. There's a lot of variety within family businesses. So they dug a bit deeper.
Like, what kind of differences did they look at?
One key factor they examined was founder control. Is the person who started the company still running the show? Or is it a later generation?
Ah, okay. And why would that matter for strategic persistence?
Well, the thinking is that founders often have incredibly strong emotional ties to the business. It's their baby, right?
Right. Their identity is often completely wrapped up in it.
Exactly. So they might have an even stronger commitment to the original vision, a greater desire to uphold tradition, and perhaps an even stronger sense of parsimony because they remember building it from scratch.
Makes intuitive sense. They might be more resistant to deviating from that original path they set out.
Potentially, yes. They built it, they know how it works, or at least how they want it to work. Significant change might feel like questioning their own creation.
So did they find that founder-controlled firms were even more persistent?
They did. That was their hypothesis too. Family firms controlled by the founding generation exhibit greater strategic persistence than those controlled by later generations. And the data supported this too. Model 3 in their Table 2 shows this effect.
Interesting. So the founder's presence really amplifies that tendency. What else did they look at within family firms?
They also considered the role of family members in top leadership positions specifically, whether a family member was the chairman of the board or the CEO or both.
And the logic there, how does having a family CEO or chairman impact persistence?
The idea is that having family members in those key roles gives the family very direct control over strategic decision-making.
It puts them right at the helm.
Precisely. A family CEO or chair can actively champion the family's vision, ensuring that the goals of tradition and parsimony are reflected in the actual strategies the company pursues. They can steer things towards that desired stability.
So it's about having someone in charge who embodies the family's long-term perspective and values.
Yes. Their presence strengthens the family's ability to maintain that consistent strategic path. This led to hypothesis 3.
Which was?
Family firms with a family chairman and or CEO exhibit greater strategic persistence than family firms without family members in those top roles. And again, Model 3 and Table 2 supported this finding.
So it really matters not just who owns it, but who's actively leading it day to day or setting the board's direction. This sounds like a really careful study. Can we talk a bit more about how they did it, the methodology?
Sure. As mentioned, S&P 1500 manufacturing firms, 1996-2013. They needed at least 5 continuous years of data for each firm to measure persistence over time.
Okay. And how did they decide if a firm was a family firm? What was the definition?
They used a pretty standard but specific definition. 3 criteria had to be met. First, at least 5% family ownership.
Okay.
Second, historical involvement of at least 2 family members could be owners, managers, board members.
Right, showing a multi-generational or broader family connection.
Yes. And third, at least 1 family member currently active in top management. This helps separate them from, say, lone founder firms or firms where the family was just a passive investor.
Seems reasonable. A clear way to identify firms where family influence is likely significant. Now, the tricky part. How did they actually measure strategic persistence?
They looked at 6 specific strategic dimensions using financial data. These were advertising intensity.
Well, like ad spending relative to sales.
Exactly. Then R&D intensity, R&D spending versus sales.
Okay.
Plant and equipment newness, basically how old their fixed assets were.
Okay.
Non-production overhead, things like administrative costs, inventory levels relative to sales. And finally, financial leverage, their debt-to-equity ratio.
So a pretty broad mix of marketing, innovation, operations, and finance strategies.
Yes, covering key areas. And for each area, they calculated the standard deviation over a rolling 5-year window.
Standard deviation. So how much the number varied year to year.
That's right. A low standard deviation meant the company's ratio for that strategy, like R&D intensity, stayed very consistent over the 5 years, indicating high persistence. A high standard deviation meant low persistence.
Got it. Low variation equals high persistence. And they did this for all 6 areas.
Yes. And then they combined these into an overall measure of strategic persistence for each firm year observation.
Now, I assume they controlled for other things that might affect strategy besides just being a family firm.
Oh, absolutely. They included a whole list of control variables to try and isolate the family effect. Things like lone founder status, blockholder ownership by non-families, the firm's age, its size, its level of risk, past performance,
right,
industry performance, even the firm's own prior strategic choices, and things like international diversification. They really tried to account for other potential explanations.
That sounds thorough. Do they worry about, correlation versus causation? Maybe persistent firms are just more likely to stay family firms?
Good question. Yes, they addressed that endogeneity concern. One technique was lagging the variables looking at family status in year 1 and persistence in year 2.
Okay. Trying to establish directionality.
And they also used a more complex method, Heckman's 2-stage technique, with instrumental variables.
Right, instrumental variables. What did they use for those? Things related to being a family firm, but not directly to persistence.
Exactly. They used things like whether the family used trusts to hold shares, the average percentage of family firms in that specific industry, and even the advertising intensity of other family firms in the industry. The idea is these things predict family firm status, but shouldn't directly cause a specific firm's persistence, except through its family status.
Sounds like they put a lot of statistical rigor into making sure the link was really there. So, back to Table 2, summarizing the main results again.
Sure. The key takeaway from Table 2 is clear. Being a family business is significantly associated with higher strategic persistence, even after controlling for all those other factors.
And it gets even stronger.
When the founder is still in control, or when a family member holds the chairman or CEO position, those specific family contexts amplify the persistence effect.
And they double-checked this. You mentioned robustness tests.
Yes, in Table 3. They reran the analyses using a longer 10-year window for persistence instead of 5 years. They also tried slightly different ways of defining a family business.
And the results held up.
Yes, the main findings remained consistent across these different checks, which adds confidence that the results aren't just an artifact of their specific measurement choices.
What about the specific strategic areas? Where were family firms most persistent? Did they say?
They did look at that. The results showed family firms were significantly more persistent in advertising intensity, R&D intensity, plant and equipment newness, and financial leverage.
So marketing, innovation, capital investment, and debt structure seem to be areas where they particularly value consistency.
That's what this data suggests. The findings for overhead and inventory levels pointed in the same direction, but weren't statistically significant in their main models.
Interesting. They also looked at performance, right? Did being successful or struggling compared to rivals change this persistence?
Yes, that was Table 4. They split the firms based on whether their market valuation, using Tobin's Q, was above or below their industry peers' average.
Okay, so high performers versus low performers, basically.
Right. And they found that family firms showed higher strategic persistence both when performing well and when performing poorly compared to non-family firms in similar situations.
Whoa. So it's not just that successful family firms stick with what works. Even when things aren't going great relative to competitors, they still tend to persist more.
Exactly. It suggests this tendency towards persistence is quite deeply rooted, maybe less reactive to immediate performance feedback compared to non-family firms. The authors see it as evidence of that long-term orientation.
That is really fascinating. It points to something fundamental about how they operate. Okay, let's try to pull this all together. What are the big contributions of this research? Why should someone studying business care about this?
Well, I think there are three main contributions. First, it gives us a solid theoretical reason, grounded in behavioral science, those goals of tradition and parsimony for why family firms might be more persistent. It's not just an observation, there's a logic behind it.
Okay, a theoretical foundation.
Second, it applies behavioral ideas, which often focus on change, to explain organizational stability or continuity, extending the theory a bit.
Right, looking at why things don't change.
And third, it provides strong empirical evidence for that idea. We often hear about the long-term orientation of family firms, but it shows it through their actual pattern of strategic actions over many years across multiple areas.
And it connects back to that nuanced idea of innovating through tradition. Persistence in R&D, for instance, isn't necessarily stagnation, but maybe a long-haul commitment to a specific innovation path that fits the family's vision.
Exactly. It adds that layer of complexity. Persistence isn't automatically bad or good. It depends on the context and the specific strategy.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. So for everyone listening, the main takeaway message is...
I'd say the key point is that family businesses really do seem to operate differently when it comes to strategy over time. Their unique goals, preserving tradition, being careful with money, combined with their ability to control the firm, lead them to stick to their strategic paths more consistently than other types of businesses.
And this effect is even stronger when founders are still at the helm or when family members are leading as CEO or chair. All right, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to chew on. We live in a world that seems to demand constant change and adaptation. So how do family businesses manage this? How do they balance the stability that comes from their strategic persistence with the need to evolve?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Could that long-term focus, that persistence, be both their greatest strength and a potential Achilles heel in today's environment? And maybe, what can non-family businesses learn from how family firms navigate this tension?
Really interesting questions to ponder. If this sparked your interest, definitely look into more research on behavioral theory or the specifics of family business management. There's a lot more out there. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.